Hello and welcome back. Wonderful news. We have Jim Sullivan here. Jim Sullivan with a group called Forever Forest. You know what? Have you ever wanted to have a legacy or create a legacy, save land, the forest, and get a tax deduction to boot? That's why we have Jim. Jim, welcome to the show.
It's good to be with you, Steve. Thanks.
Thanks for being here. Look, tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about Forever Forest, and how'd you get involved with land conservation?
So I guess it's about 11 years ago I made a work transition from the non-for-profit world into working in the field of tax planning with a national firm and really bringing new clients on. And we used to do all kinds of different strategies that would help people from a tax planning vantage point. And after a few years, I came upon Forever Forest as a client, brought them in, and we took a look at what they were doing from a vantage point of legacy planning and tax savings, and our team was very enthused about it. We had some great former prosecutors from the Department of Justice Tax Division or other auditing agencies as a part of our team. So it's some real tax-heavy hitters, and they looked at this and they said, we need to really make this as a part of our platform, which began to become a reality. And over time, I just realized that was more consistent with my values than just saving people money on their taxes was to actually do something good, all the while saving them money on their taxes. So it was just a great natural transition to move over. So it was about, I guess in 2013, I made the transition to work purely with Forever Forest. And what I really loved about Forever Forest was it's founded by our founder, Nancy Zach. She has a background in real estate development, and she stumbled on the tax savings power of conservation easements to work in the flow with development, where developers could develop certain areas and then apportion other areas out in land conservation. And not only would that be environmentally sound, but it engenders great goodwill, and it generated tremendous tax savings for those development firms. And so she got so jazzed on it that it became the central focus of her business. So she moved into it, and that was about 15 years ago that Forever Forest has been in business.
So well, you know what? How did they, called conservation easements, get their tax benefit? How did that start?
Sure. Well, conservation easements, a lot of people don't know about them, but they really they derive their existence from the government's incentives and the government involvement in land conservation. As you may remember from history class, in 1903, Teddy Roosevelt declared the first land conservation initiatives, and the storyline of government involvement in land conservation began. And it was around in the 80s that in the Reagan administration, they began to realize that they should privately incentivize it and not have government management or ownership of property. So they created tax incentives for private individuals to preserve private lands. And they created tax. It's basically all the government has at their disposal is to incentivize things with good, welcoming tax policies. So
basically what's happening is the U.S. government is now saying, hey, look, we're going to give you a tax benefit for land conservation. So
that's right.
How is that, how does that affect land conservation now here in the U.S.?
Well, according to the national records, it was about 6,000 acres get developed every day in the United States of America. So this was well needed and much needed in order to ramp up the pace of conservation to keep up with the rate of development. At present, the amount of acreage in the United States of America that is currently under private conservation easement it's about the same amount of acreage in the entire state of Washington. So that sounds pretty formidable, but it's been great progress. But there's always a cry and always a need for more and more creative applications of these so that we can preserve our world, preserve these places for generations to come.
Now, there's been some recent congressional developments when it comes to conservation easements. Can you tell us about those?
Yeah, it's been really exciting because as I mentioned, it was about 1980 that the tax incentives first rolled in, but that was 35 years ago, 36 years ago now. And what's come of age now is that Congress has been so pleased to see the advancements it's made that they've created a permanent threshold where an individual donor can take a deduction up to 50% of their adjusted gross income. So what that means to taxpayers is they can cut their taxes in half with the tax benefits from a conservation easement.
So what you're really saying here is if you have you just got a bonus of $500,000 because you've been a good guy at the company. And if you were to get a conservation easement, you would be for $250,000. You would be able to deduct that $250,000 because it's half of the $500,000.
That's right.
Okay, that's great.
From an end user vantage point, the reality is that a conservation easement is essentially, and it's important for your viewers and listeners to understand, that it is essentially a deed restriction on property that permanently forgoes the commercial exploitation of certain elements of the property. So if you could have developed a strip mall, you're saying, I'm not going to develop a strip mall, I'm just going to put a house there, but then all the undeveloped space, we get a deduction for that. And what's really great is the deduction you get is the difference between what it's worth at its fair market value, highest and best use, versus what it'll be worth once those development rights are gone. It becomes basically a legal instrument where those development rights are broken off, bundled up, and then they're given to either a non-for-profit land trust or a governmental agency, and that's what drives the tax deduction back to the donor.
So essentially, when you take a look at a park in the middle of a big development,
right,
that park could essentially be a conservation easement.
That's right.
And somebody get a very significant tax deduction as if that little park was actually a gigantic industrial building.
That's exactly right. And in fact, many people will go to parks and not ask themselves, how did this get here? When I first began to understand this, I did my own study on places that I used to go with my family, and I would realize that these places, they always had a storyline, and it was always started with a high capacity, usually very wealthy donor.
Now, we have about a minute to go. The big thing that I would like to know, as well as our viewers and listeners, was how are they applying these strategies to everyday people?
So somebody who owns a piece of property, they can conserve it, and an evaluation can be done where they can realize this type of tax benefit. But if you didn't own a property, well, then we have a collection we call the Select Reserve, which is a collection of pre-identified properties. So that's another consideration. A third consideration is to get in on just fractional or partial ownership, and we have a network of landowners who are always willing to welcome people in that way as well. But the key thing for your listeners or viewers to be watched for is those high equity events where you're bringing in a lot of money, you're selling a business, or you're getting an exercise of a non-qualified stock option, or something that's coming into a big equity event. Whenever you're paying the highest tax brackets, you need to look at this and consider how land conservation can help you not only promote legacy and conservation, but then also it can make great tax planning as well to save you a bundle in taxes.
So in other words, if somebody has a whole bunch of recaptured depreciation from a rental property, they can use a conservation easement to reduce the taxes.
That's exactly
Same
right.
thing if somebody got a big, hey, we're going to pay you to stay here for 5 years, but we're going to get $750,000. This is a wonderful way as well.
Sure. Or Roth conversions, for example, when people have all of these assets in an individual retirement account, they can convert that to a tax-free structure. Of course, that's an equity event. It's a taxable event. They can offset that event with a deduction this way. So they just need to have qualified counsel working with them and helping them. And a firm like ours or qualified counsel can guide them through that, because the key thing is for them to know is that it is a process of some complexity. There's a lot of details to be paying attention to. There isn't any government control on a conservation easement, no pre-qualification, but the IRS is the after-the-fact gatekeeper. So you want to make sure that all your ducks in a row so everything's done correctly, and a team of qualified, competent professionals can help you with that.
Jim, thank you so much for being part of the show today. It was great information for our viewers, and I know it'll make a difference in their life, especially when it comes to the dollars and cents on taxes.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve.
Hey, for more information on conservation easements, you want to go to the Silver-Haired Tsunami website, or you can go to the Forever Forest website. Stick with us. We'll be right back.